Hello everyone. As you know, there's no patio conversations as usual in the month of December, but some of us who represent patio traveled all the way to Australia to the SAHANZ conference in Launceston and actually presented a paper on patio conversations and a reflection on what it does to our field of architectural history. This paper is really a reflection on what happens when we think of the Indian Ocean as a conceptual lens, the frame of transfers instead of bounded geographies, and many other things. We want to thank everybody who contributed to the patio conversations that figured in this discussion. The paper received a fair bit of engagement and some very interesting questions. So I will in a moment share the recording. We were supposed to record this in the venue live, but because of a technical glitch, we're unable to save the full video. In January, in the new year, we will return with patio conversations as usual, where we will be, we have two very exciting speakers and respondent confirmed on the theme of tools of building practice. So we hope to see you then. In the meantime, I'm sending our best wishes for the holidays, and I wish you all a very, very happy new year. Hello everyone, let me first share my excitement to be here at SAHANZ personally for the first time and to speak on this extremely timely theme of decentering in architectural historiography. I'm representing a collective authorship on this paper, which is entitled PATIO and Architectural Knowledge Exchange in the Global South. In a moment, I'll explain what PATIO is. And Amit Srivastava, amongst my co-authors, is here, and we very much miss Sarah Melsons and Yakin Kinger, who have also contributed quite substantively to this paper. Now, let me start first with what motivates us, as the paper's subtitle suggests, to propose the Indian Ocean rim as a framework to decenter architectural historiography. Now, this drawing that you're looking at is prepared by the architect Jeffrey Bawa, who's also an excellent maker of provocative maps, and I felt it resonates quite deeply with our collective task. Why is that? That's because at the core and certainly not at the extremity of our proposition lies not land but a body of water. Now this has both spatial and conceptual implications for how we uncover and narrate architectural histories. To begin with, the framework we propose for this discussion is hardly an abstract one. It emerges from a year of conversations within PATIO, a scholarly network called the Platform for Architectural Transfers in the Indian Ocean Rim. PATIO was formed in 2024, and with a shift in our attention to the ocean, this paper describes a shifting field evident in the scholarship of many colleagues as an explicit form of decentering. This is not a single piece of research by us, its authors, but the paper is actually a work of collective scholarship and contributions from many of our colleagues from around the world. Patio conversations occur between researchers based in or working on, but not limited to South Asia, East Africa, West Asia, mainland and island Southeast Asia. These sessions kept bringing to the surface three historiographical difficulties that many in this room will recognize. They are not entirely new, but endure astonishingly well in architectural history's conceptual habits. Moreover, these difficulties map onto the everyday constraints that shape how histories in and of the global south are written. The first of such problems is an attachment to the nation state, which overlaps to an extent with an area studies approach. Architectural history has long been arranged around unquestioned categories like Indian, Sri Lankan, or even Southeast Asian architecture, which conflates geographies of architectural production with political and territorial borders. Post-colonial critiques that emerged in the late 20th century were of course necessary to challenge persistent colonial categories. Yet they often insisted on representation of the colonized people, the nation, and including their subalterns. That insistence, however, paradoxically, tended to reify the very categories it sought to unsettle. Regions and nations are often defined in relation to former colonial powers, and post-colonial critique met with limited success in achieving what the historian Jürgen Osterhammel called a flattened world in historiography. How then can we read the global south not as a derivative discourse that reminds us of imperialism, but an equal arena of historical production in its own right? A second difficulty concerns co-authorship and agency. Architectural history has quite often been organized around professionals. Our narratives tend to center elite actors, the architect, the engineer, the state official. The contributions of overlooked agents such as contractors, caste-based building communities, migrant laborers, artisans, and in which sense I mean how people appear with building processes and with materials, have systematically become marginalized. This professional bias is not accidental. In many contexts, the legality of the term architect tends to determine the scope of architectural histories and also leads to marginalization, including by gender and race. However, recent work in construction history and in production studies has started to push against this, drawing our attention to labor processes attached to particular materials and techniques. That movement is still growing, and for the most part, in the histories that surround us already, professional agents continue to remain centered in most accounts about the global south. A third problem relates to archives and records. Especially for the colonial period, a bulk of research still relies heavily on collections housed in the global north, and these collections are shaped by the curatorial priorities of former imperial or colonial powers. Records of administration, taxation, military logistics, public works, and elite correspondence dominate this archival landscape. As a result, stories of local builders, of labor, of everyday spatial practices are either glossed over or missing. As many patio conversations have shown, oral histories, grey literature, community archives, and material culture have helped to maneuver such absences. Yet, in the epistemic weight assigned, the balance of what counts as evidence remains unequal. The challenge the PATIO network set itself was how to navigate the limitations of this triad of the nation, the professional, and institutionalized archives. For us, that is where the Indian Ocean held promise to explore a new approach, which we did through 8 research themes. Such a framework is driven by the work of key thinkers in the practice of global history. We employed firstly Pankaj Mishra's understanding of the global south as a historically produced space exceeding conventional geographies such as national boundaries. We also draw on Sugata Bose's description of the Indian Ocean as an inter-regional arena shaped by overlapping circuits of trade, migration, and cultural exchange explicitly. Equally, we follow Isabel Hofmeier's powerful proposition of the ocean as a method. Taking these concepts together, we asked what happens when we write architectural history not from the vantage of static territories, but from the idea of circulation, and more so at multiple scales. This oceanic framework compels us to pay attention to movements of people, goods, construction techniques, bureaucratic tools, and aesthetic sensibilities. It also makes us take notice of the diverse actors who matter in these histories. For example, the individuals or groups beyond reach when taking the unit of analysis as the nation, the office, or the atelier can then be made visible. The ocean therefore reveals histories that were overlooked just because they did not align with existing historical or geographical categories or even institutionalized archives. Through such concerns, PATIO too coalesced as a network of researchers. Over a year of monthly online conversations starting in middle of 2024, we heard the voices of scholars on a wide range of sites, populations, and themes that in some way or the other related to architectural transfers. In various ways, these conversations invoked circulation at multiple scales of analysis. Reflecting on this emerging body of research and its analytical instruments and frames, we can then begin to map them onto the three problems this paper set forth with. Let's begin with the question of territories and regions. Strikingly, in much of the research discussed at PATIO conversations, the nation state turned out to be a rather limited unit of analysis. The work of Anthony Wacko, for example, examined a workforce of around 40,000 Punjabi and Gujarati labourers from the north and west of India respectively, who built the Uganda Railway in 1901. This project led to the workers settling, even trading in Uganda after its completion. From the 1910s onward, their presence transformed the urban landscape and construction industry in the town of Jinja. These settlers even developed a retail typology called the Duka, which became a crucial site of interaction and friction between an Asian mercantile class and the town's urban administration. Now, no part of the story neatly fits into Indian or Ugandan architectural history. Rather, with the Indian Ocean as the conduit, it is one of architectural transfers. National categories also seem to matter little in the research of Madhumati and Zara Yassoon on the Chettiar trade network spanning India's southeastern coast, Malaysia and Singapore. This work examined how diasporic South Indian Chettiar community carried their financial, social and ritual practices to generate new building traditions in Malacca. The Kitang house type, for instance, with its Burmese teak and layered decorative schemes, cannot be understood purely as local or purely as imported. It resulted from maritime commerce and diasporic identity formations. The research of Dipti Shukla and Nirodha Disanyake traced another kind of movement, of money, in Gulf migration from Kerala and Sri Lanka respectively. Shukla and Disanyake showed how remittances from migrant labor did more than just add rooms or concrete to dwellings. These flows resulted in import of European and Arabic stylistic architectural elements onto coastal houses. They transformed the aspirations and social status of indigenous fisherfolk in Sri Lanka and even altered patterns of property ownership to empower women. Again, architecture here hardly represents stable national culture, but rather manifests within transnational circuits of labor. Some PATIO contributions shifted our attention from movement of people or money to expertise. Nicholas Bill, for example, showed how military constructions in Malaya by a Hong Kong firm employed British engineers who worked with Indian and Chinese draftsmen in the colonial Straits settlements in the 1920s. Bill examined how these workers drew on local construction techniques in Singapore and Malabari Indian fabricators whilst using steel from Australian foundries. In Dhaval Chauhan and Rupinder Singh's work on knowledge transfers, we encountered a young Neelkant Chaya and Kurla Varki, who both were later renowned academics, and they traveled to Nairobi in the 1960s and reoriented architectural pedagogy at the Royal Technical College of East Africa. Such pedagogical exchanges drew from their architectural training in Ahmedabad in Western India, and in turn, the East African experience also became foundational to their architectural teaching in India later. Similarly, exploring pedagogical histories of architecture, Ali Javed showed how architects in Egypt and Iran, in the context of the 1960s and 70s upheavals, had studied at Howard University and carried culturally grounded approaches in architectural education back to their home contexts. What unites these rather diverse studies is that none of them make much sense if we insist on keeping the nation as the primary frame of investigation. Rather, it's the Indian Ocean rim, when approached as an inter-regional arena, that makes their connected histories visible. This approach in some ways might be resonant with transatlantic flows of global histories, but also it advances and stands apart from it in some senses. The building projects in the Straits settlements, or even the case of workers in Uganda, bring forth how diverse the agency in architectural production, or rather co-production, can be. On that note, let me move out of the map and turn to the second theme emergent in PATIO conversations that informs our framework to decenter architectural historiography. This is by recognizing the diverse agents of built environment production. Several contributors to our conversations focused on the role of non-elite actors. In colonial Bombay of the 1910s, Isa Sheikh showed Indian contractors and craftspeople were not merely executing British designs. They mediated between colonial authorities and local building communities, negotiating costs and conditions, and decisively advocated labor rights. Such stories complicate any neat distinction between designer and builder. Similarly, Chetan Sahasrabuddhe took us into the world of caste-based building communities and their specific trades in the late 1700s. Groups such as Vadar, Kumbar and Lonar, associated with stone cutting, brick making and lime preparation respectively, crossed regional and linguistic boundaries. Their vocabularies were shaped by Persianate and other classificatory terms. Meanwhile, Megha Chand Inglis's ethnographic study highlighted the work of the Sompuras, a community of native designers and builders from Gujarat and Western India who specialized in temple architecture. Now, the Sompuras do not neatly fit professional categories of architects or engineers, but still they conceptualize, produce, and export processed temple components across the world. Their drawings and models, calculations, spatial decisions, and embodied practices sit uneasily in relation to standard professional conventions. Yet these remain central temple building processes in both South Asia's colonial and more recent history of diasporic practices. In the realm of material histories, PATIO contributors paid attention to institutional, corporate, and even non-human agents of building. Richa Shah and Meenakshi Jain examined how the reconstruction of the Bombay-Pune road prompted new building materials like concrete and bitumen. Such infrastructure projects drew varied communities from the hinterland into new formations of labor driven by institutions such as the Indian Roads Congress and firms like Travancore Cements. At the same time, building materials themselves and the tools of building practice, by which I mean specifications, manuals, or bureaucratic forms, they appeared as powerful carriers of architectural exchange. In Ashmita Gupta and Kairavi Maniar's studies, standardized contracts and bureaucratic forms circulated in the Bombay province and offered a window into how seemingly neutral instruments created deeply uneven conditions for contractors and labor. In Javaria Shahid's examination of irrigation infrastructure in colonial Punjab in the 1920s and 30s, we saw how land tenure regulations and manuals transformed water from a common resource into a taxable commodity and therefore profoundly reshaped the built and social formations around it. Across these contributions, architecture emerged within negotiations among a wide range of human and non-human agents rather than a simple expression of an architect's or engineer's intent. Recognizing this aspect becomes crucial for our historical narratives to reflect on how buildings were actually made through processes of co-authorship. Moving beyond fixed ideas of territories or expected professional agents within this oceanic approach requires new ways of thinking about archives and records as well. Indeed, a focus on marginalized actors and networks of circulation quickly exposes the limits of conventional archives. Several contributors responded to this problem by working across new, unexplored or underexplored archival registers. For example, local language documents became a site of Sheikha Ali Asali's examination, who worked with Egyptian texts. This helped to foreground indigenous engineering knowledge in the Arab world, as well as the agency of local practitioners that were otherwise obscured by Eurocentric archival traditions. Mehwish Abid's Living Digital Archive of Migration Stories in Pakistan treated Western objects in Eastern homes as sources producing knowledge and curating cultural memory. Other participants critically used visual, spatial, and ethnographic methods to rethink what counts as a record. Johan Pieris's documentary on the water polo housing scheme in Sri Lanka combined topographical maps, drone footage, poetry, and personal archives to reconstruct an otherwise invisible housing history of Sri Lanka in the 1950s and 1960s. Sarah Melsons and Ishita Shah worked closely with the Wadar community in Pune to trace how histories of construction labor might be written through ethnographic engagement rather than through official papers. Meanwhile, Pamudu Tenakun's work on Colombo's De Soiza building unpacked its place in contemporary Sri Lankan society. Tenakun did this by engaging with the community's changing relationship with this colonial structure and drew on oral histories of intergenerational families that had resided in it. Drawings that break accepted conventions of architecture also became an archive in their own right. Shati Chattopadhyay's analysis of diaries and notations kept by self-taught builders for temporary Durga Puja structures in West Bengal revealed how planning, logistics, and ephemeral spatial arrangements profoundly left traces outside formal archival repositories. Such explorations of new kinds of records actively unsettle the authority of conventional archives. They remind us that if our historiography is to be truly decentered, its underlying methods must also interrogate the definitions of the archive as we know it. Scholars from and in the global South or Indian Ocean Rim have a more direct access to these local repositories and possess the cultural capital required to identify and read such archives. Yet they often lack access to research networks and resources, leading to a brain drain to the global north. Through its monthly online conversations, PATIO seeks to bridge this gap and facilitate scholarly engagement across boundaries and institutional contexts. Let me, with these examples, return to the questions this paper began with. PATIO's first year of conversations is but about specific cases. Yet collectively, these instances also lend evidence to the imperatives we follow. To decenter architectural historiography with the Indian Ocean as a framework, the global South must be reconfigured and itself made plural. Its architectural processes and their histories must be viewed as a product of transfers of people, materials, skills, and stories, amongst many other things, rather than a set of discrete national traditions authored by a narrow professional elite and documented in formal repositories. By reaching out to the extremities of the Indian Ocean Rim, extremities that in fact have long been outside the reach of mainstream architectural histories, we might be able to imagine a new methodological center for a collective historiographical enterprise. By foregrounding circulations, by diversifying our understanding of agency and broadening our sense of what counts as an archive, we, at PATIO included, might contribute to this larger project of decentering. Thank you very much.